So what are the United States, Israel, Iran, and Pakistan up to again? The war continues, and today we'll look at how it's progressing, what the damages are, what successes there have been, and why there's a risk of Pakistan getting involved in this war because of the alliance treaties it has. If you want to know more, keep watching this video. So far, the Americans and Israelis are continuing the bombing and are bombing the entire country. Of course, they're mainly focusing on Tehran because Tehran is the center of power. When we look at these shots, we can see that there really are many places here that have already been hit. Here we can see how a government building was hit before and after. Various other complexes before and after being hit. If you want, feel free to pause it, zoom in, or I can zoom in myself. In any case, the Americans and of course the Israelis are really causing havoc in Iran and doing a lot of damage. We even have footage where it seems like they're carpet bombing entire civilian neighborhoods, but this footage isn't confirmed and it's more or less Iranian propaganda that claims and shows how ruthless the Americans are. And in this regard, I would probably agree that the Americans and Israelis are acting ruthlessly because they really are bombing civilian neighborhoods, bombing places where people live. And that's because they're targeting high-ranking officials, they're targeting generals, they're targeting high-ranking members of the Revolutionary Guard. And of course, these people live in residential areas, their families live in residential areas. These attacks are also targeting high-ranking Iranian scientists who are part of the nuclear program. So yes, civilians are being killed, and civilians are being killed in large numbers because Iran and the United States, as I said, are acting ruthlessly. Their goal is not to commit terror. Their goal is not to frighten the population. Their goal is not to cause civilian casualties. They cause them because, regardless, without much concern for civilian losses, they are eliminating key figures of the regime, eliminating key scientists, eliminating key commanders. So yes, strategic and tactical objectives seem to be prioritized over the lives of civilians. Besides the fact that they are eliminating, unfortunately, along with generals and everyone else, also civilians to a large extent, and above all, they are currently trying to destroy ammunition depots, mainly missile depots and missile factories, whether underground or above ground. As for the missiles themselves, their numbers started to drop sharply after Israel and the United States began attacking these depots. The number of missiles that Iran is able to launch has basically been dropping explosively, exponentially. Every day it's half, then half again, and half again. So this is really a big success for the United States, that they are crippling Iran's ability to fire missiles around. Of course, there is a possibility that Iran stopped firing missiles because they decided to first burden the air defenses of the Arab world, the Americans and Israel, more or less with drones. They're waiting for the air defenses to use up their ammunition on the drones, and only then will they send the missiles. However, considering how at the beginning they were firing a lot of missiles and then more or less stopped, and with Israel and the United States destroying missile warehouses and production facilities, it's much more likely that they simply don't have those missiles anymore, at least not in such quantities. Besides the fact that the Americans and Israelis are bombing civilian areas and weapon warehouses, they are also bombing the border with Iran and Iraq, because this is where the Kurds and the Kurdish resistance are concentrated. Because the Kurds fought against the Islamic State and of course against their own enemies for their own state and everything, they fought on the territory of Iraq. At this moment in Iraq, it's more or less a lost cause. There's nothing left to fight for. It's relatively over there. And the fighters who fought on the territory of Iraq have now gathered and are going to fight on the territory of Iran. And that's something the Americans support. The CIA is cooperating with the Americans in this process, and as a result, not only are they supplying weapons to the Kurds, but they're also attacking outposts of Iranian soldiers who are guarding the crossing between the Iraqi and Iranian border so that the Kurdish fighters can get into Iranian territory. Here we're witnessing that the Americans are more or less supporting the emergence of a civil war, or at least separatist tendencies of the Kurds in northern Iran. But when it comes to the separatist tendencies of the Kurds in northern Iran, that's problematic because it's not just the Iranians or the Iranian government who would have an issue with it and would act against them, but most likely even Turkey itself would act against them, for example. That's the problem with the Kurds as such. There are several countries that absolutely do not want an independent Kurdish state. So if the Kurds were to rise up against the Iranian government now, we could easily see the Turks start bombing them, and in doing so, actually help the Iranian government. So that's a bit of the problem. Anyway, the fate of the Kurds. The fate of the Kurds is of course sad, and once again, they will probably try to get their own state. I almost feel like they will once again let themselves be betrayed by the West. However, besides the fact that the West is bombing civilians, helping the Kurds, or wants to use the Kurds again, and besides the fact that we are of course also bombing missile silos, we are also bombing and destroying the Navy, the Iranian Navy. 17 ships have already been destroyed or significantly damaged. Submarines even torpedoed some ships. We have footage of a submarine destroying an Iranian ship, and it looks like scenes from World War II. If you know those World War II shots where you see a periscope sticking out above the waves, the water moving like this, and then a huge explosion that lifts and splits the ship in half, that's exactly the kind of footage we have right now from the Americans who recorded and sent us, and published information about how they're destroying the Iranian Navy. Why is it important for the Americans and Israel to destroy the Iranian Navy? It's important so that the aircraft carriers are safe. The aircraft carriers of the United States, the aircraft carriers were safe. And besides that, the Iranian Navy can be used and has been used to supply Hezbollah or Hamas. And of course, it's something that helps Iran project its influence beyond its own territory. So for that reason, the goal of the whole operation is not only the nuclear program, not only the missiles and carriers, but also the Navy, because it simply allows Iran to project some of its power into its surroundings beyond its borders. Because when we talk about how Iran attacks beyond its borders and into its surroundings, we can mention, for example, that it fired a missile at Turkey. Turkey shot down this missile, so effectively NATO was attacked, a NATO country was attacked, but so far Turkey doesn't seem to be asking for any talks. Activation of Article 4 or Article 5, that it will handle it on its own, which is fine, we're off the hook because of this. But besides that, other areas were also attacked. For example, in the Middle East, the American CIA headquarters in Riyadh was attacked. Other countries are also being targeted. They are being targeted, but mainly now it's the oil routes. American tankers in the Persian Gulf were attacked, which I feel, of course, the goal was to somehow destroy these tankers. And of course, to prevent their passage, devalue the oil, and so on. But the main goal was what we've already talked about here several times. And what is Iran's main weapon? And that's the price of oil. If you look at how the price of oil is developing right now, it's just skyrocketing, it's soaring, it's going up. If you had bought oil here a few weeks ago and were selling it now, then you would be like crypto god investors. It's really a high return on oil, about, as we said, 40% in less than a month. It's been going up since the start of the invasion. When it was at 64, it climbed up to 77. And we're still going higher. It's hard to say where it will stop. In any case, the price of oil is going up, and that's a weapon that Iran can use. Because based on the high price of oil, it will be American taxpayers who like to buy gasoline. They'll complain because gasoline will get more expensive for them. We'll complain because gasoline will get more expensive for us. All of Europe will complain because gasoline will get more expensive for them. And we'll complain mainly because gasoline is getting more expensive for us. And our goal, or the goal of the United States, that's total bullshit. and that is to provoke a civil war in Iran. And more or less, there aren't any real objectives there, none that would be worth defending, none that would be worth paying for in any way. Because honestly, those objectives are miserable. Those objectives are more or less inferior. Therefore, of course, the price of oil, the high price of oil and all the inconveniences associated with it, it's just too high a price. And in the coming weeks, we'll see how that sentiment will emerge. Let's destroy Iran and save the Iranian people. So here we have expensive gasoline, and in the Middle East, people are being bombed because the Americans want to provoke a civil war and simply destroy things. That sentiment will start to turn. And against American intervention in Iran, there will be more and more people, even those who were supportive at first. Yeah, the Iranian people now have a chance to gain freedom. Then they'll see that the Iranian people don't really have such a big chance, that it leads to more problems than successes. They'll begin to have some trouble with it. In the same way, not only will oil become more expensive, not only will gasoline become more expensive, but gas is also becoming more expensive. Now, of course, the price of gas has dropped a little, but as you can see, gas has basically skyrocketed. When you look at it on a short-term chart like this, it looks more extreme than if you put it on, say, a 5-year chart. On a 5-year chart, it doesn't look so bad. Because here we have, of course, the price of gas after the Russians started doing their tricks. It's simply a certain increase in prices, which won't be pleasant. By the way, if we look at the development of oil prices from a 5-year perspective, it's not at any all-time high or anything like that right now. But it's simply rising. That's why we're at the level of 2024. It's not pleasant. Things are just going to get more expensive. It will affect our economic ability to do things. And it will help Russia make money. It's just going to be unpleasant. It will be geopolitically harmful. It's something that will simply harm Europe. And because of it, we'll complain. We'll have problems. And people will support the American intervention in Iran less and less. And when we talk about who supports or doesn't support the American intervention in Iran, of course it's appropriate to mention that you could support this content here using the QR codes. But mainly it's good to mention that the intervention could theoretically be supported by the presence of Pakistanis in these areas. Because Pakistan, let's say, is threatening that it could get involved in the war with Iran. Here I have to give you a bit of relief. If Pakistan were to get involved in the war with Iran, then it wouldn't join on Iran's side, but against Iran, right? And that's because Iran is attacking Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia and Pakistan are allies. So if Iran continued to attack Saudi Arabia, just like it did when it struck at CIA headquarters in Saudi Arabia, then Pakistan might be forced to respond. It might be forced to launch airstrikes, for example, to join in. So in this regard, if Pakistan were to join the war, it would actually join in. On the side of the West, on the side of America, on the side of Israel, if you will, because of those alliance treaties. At the same time, Pakistan says it would not like to do that. At the same time, it says that thanks to it, only a minimum number of missiles flew to Saudi Arabia. Because if they didn't have that alliance treaty, a lot more missiles would be flying to Saudi Arabia. And at the same time, Pakistan, he doesn't say this, but we know it. Pakistan has a strong motivation to make rhetorical threats, to act tough, to say how important he is, but to actually deploy something. There would be a big problem there. There would be a big problem for that reason. Because in Pakistan, a lot of people support Iran. Because a lot of people there follow the Iranian branch of Islam. So if Pakistan went to war against Iran, it would meet with brutal resistance from the local population. And we saw, for example, in footage when Pakistanis attacked the American embassy in Pakistan because of that attack. That's exactly the kind of chaos that would be in the streets. But on a much larger scale if Pakistan started bombing Iran. So Pakistan is making threats. He says he could get involved. He says he has that alliance treaty with Saudi Arabia. But real involvement, actual participation, I think that would really hurt Pakistan. and it would have major consequences, especially in the streets of Pakistan. Otherwise, it's important to mention that at this moment, people are really stopping talking about taking down the Iranian regime. That was propaganda spread by the Americans at the beginning to somehow morally justify their intervention. So, taking down any regime stops being the topic. The main topic really is the destruction of the nuclear program and destroying Iran's ability to strike with missiles in Europe and Israel. So, destroying Iranian missiles. And destruction, the destruction of the Iranian Navy. In other words, it's a downright simple projection of power and a preemptive strike on Iran. It doesn't have any, let's say, noble idea of a free Iranian people. That was pure propaganda meant to justify it to people who believe in spreading democracy by fire and sword and so on. This needs to be said. And at this moment, there's really a strong chance that the Iranian regime will simply stay in power. That the Americans will eventually be, let's say, driven away, or that the Americans will eventually give up because the costs of the war will be too high, and that Iran will continue just as it has until now. It will just be significantly weakened. Yeah. So this is the current situation. In addition, we have more information that Iran is launching a bunch of drones instead of missiles, which overwhelms the air defenses, whether it's the American aircraft carriers or their Middle Eastern allies. So that's another thing that's problematic. So yeah, there are a lot of aspects here that tell us that Iran is not giving up, that Iran is a problematic opponent, that Iran can make it very expensive and very messy, and that this war won't turn out exactly as we dreamed or as those who support the war dreamed. So that's it. Support this content. Come to the streams, keep watching. And now we're going to look at another country affected by this war because its enemy has become stronger thanks to this war, and that's Ukraine, which of course has been suffering from the war with Russia for 4 years now. So that's it. Take care. See you later.